Reading a few essays from my book, For the Love of Wisdom. These are all published on my weblog, and I've edited them. Essay 171, Collapsology and Neo-Smartologists. Within democracy, ostensibly blessed with free political choice, the future is malleable and non-deterministic. There are fundamental collapsologists of all faiths and faithlessnesses, I would guess, including pre-trib Christians. As a neo-Calvinist, centrist, post-trib or post-Darwinian and quantum meta-theoretical transcendence optimist American, my opinion is that the future can be shaped toward the optimal with intelligence rightly applied. That may appear to be lacking in politicians generally, yet one can't have everything. It should be possible to stop population growth on Earth and restore the ecosphere to health, transition the economy to an ecologically long-term sustainable footing and halt, and reverse the sixth planetary mass extinction caused by human destruction of habitat. The first world has already entered into the post-industrial evolution, though upgrading materials, science, and production as well, unfortunately outsourcing some dirty industries to countries like China. It is always possible to select dystopian economic, industrial, and residential ensembles politically. Escapism such as unlimited space expansion hypothetically avoids the clear and present challenges on Earth. The solar system should have no more than maybe 5 billion souls living off Earth anywhere in reasonably healthy places with Earth-like gravity norms. The sources of the solar system resources should not be relocated in mass or consumed as fast as bacterial-like growth rates can allow. There are not religious or political reasons why the people of Earth cannot recover the ecosphere and manage it well in a non-bacterial way as God probably intended. Well, if there is a reason, it is just plain pervasive social and political stupidity. I disclaim being a neo-smartologist that regards humanity except for oneself as generally stupid. Is there enough oxygen in the atmosphere still for intelligence to continue? Moderation in human space development and eco-conservation. When billionaire Jeff Bezos declared the desire to expand human lifestyles into the solar system with 1 trillion people inhabiting every available niche and a construction possible, he expressed two human characteristics simultaneously. One was the honorable desire to advance technologically and explore. The second was careless, intemperate disregard of collateral damage to the ecosphere that supports life. On Earth, the ecosphere of the planet is under relentless sustained attack and degradation from overuse. The concern of Wall Street is for profits with disregard for externalities such as the world outside profit margins. That is why moderation and temperance need return to business through regulation and reform of capitalism such that democracy could be rectified. And the citizens need look to the Democratic Party for temperance and reason. The Democratic Party today is godless and non-rational. Its leadership is incapable of coordinating and balancing its own policies. Its extremes run from Jeff Bezos to billionaire, with wild extremist expansion to AOC socialist Green New Deal, to dole the people with Social Security and Medicare for everyone, except Medicare Plan B costs $200 a month. And if you only make $400 or $500 or $600 in Social Security when you're old, the only free thing you get from Medicare is hospice care, and you would have to pay doctor visits and surgeons and anesthesiologists and such yourself. And you wouldn't qualify for cheap drugs under Plan D without Plan B. While jets are grounded and global warming remedies are forced on the nation, while the rest of the world issues compensating carbon dioxide, flatus and wonder. The time frame for correcting the world's ecosphere decline is presently ticking away. A UN report says 1 million species are threatened with extinction. Wall Street doesn't understand the web of life and how one species supports another and actually creates a livable ecosphere. For the business people, the birds and bees are nice childhood stories to inform youth on how to advance to sex automobiles, rectilinear homes, shag carpet social resort organizations, and adulthood watching football. Correcting human ecospheric destruction effects that are inherent in the human economic structure is beyond the ken-nell of human social reality. Human economic structure engineering is required to correct the most ancient models for human development of exploiting the environment to benefit humanity. Humanity was given the task by God of mastering the ecosphere and its wildlife rather than simply consuming it as bacteria. The HES need account for rebuilding the ecosphere and its wild denizens as well as using it for human convenience. It is as if humanity not only need enjoy the natural lawn, they need also mow, fertilize, and water it. The Earth presently has a human population of more than 7.5 billion people, and that number is sufficient to have put human survival, or at least ecospheric survival, on a negative growth trajectory. If one were to chart the ecospheric health on a graph, the ecospheric health would be inversely reflecting human population increase that need to be corrected. Human growth should stabilize. Yet even so, the ecospheric decline need be reversed. The von Bezos plan for lunatic human expansion in the solar system is the traditional bacterial model of growth overcoming its growth medium. It is a reckless expansion model putting human existence into dangerous and unnecessary, volatile and vulnerable conditions on the edge of destruction. Moderation is what is required for human development. Enlightened moderation with an advanced human economic system comprehensive of human economic impact on a given ecosphere. Consuming the Earth to exhaustion before consuming the solar system to exhaustion is a bacterial business plan rather than human. Humans are about intellect, differentiating them from beasts, not larger parts. A human bacterial model of exhausting Earth, then exhausting the solar system before seeking new star systems to exhaust is daft and dangerous. Evolution works through natural selection. There are more losers than winners in natural selection. Formerly, there were dozens of humans like primates, and now just one remains. The prospect of just one species representative surviving numerous environmental challenges are very poor. It is better to avoid brinksmanship with just one species rep existing. Human population in the solar system should never exceed 15 billion people, more or less. Sticking 20 million on Mars, terraforming Venus, placing 1 billion in the outer solar system is probably enough. There is no urgent need to exhaust all the resources of the solar system. Constructing human habitats in space might be convenient to place excess Earth population in a few billion more, and those people would need to visit Earth periodically, at least 1 year out of 5, to maintain human physiological health in Earth-like specific gravity and field conditions. Humanity has grown within a particular gravitational field strength, and shape for gravity fields may perhaps alter in shape. Often people don't realize how dependent human form is upon the particular gravitational field of the Earth. Without it, the natural growth processes of a body are themselves akin to cancer. The relationships of the body's parts to itself are formed with gravitational governance that, when removed, changes the entire structural logic. Even the anus is the downward terminus of the digestive tract, has no gravitational forms moving food waste downward. Excrement would be upwardly mobile, perhaps toward billionaire brains. A future scenario for human development should have patience. Evolution is done in a day or a year. 1,000 years isn't much for evolution's pace. Human development and adaptation to the solar system should utilize several thousand years for reasonable continuity of human thought and sentience while intellectual and physical development continues. Earth ecospheric systems probably should carry no more than 1 billion souls at a time, with the remainder scattered about the solar system with no more than 15 billion living about it altogether. Women no longer wish to be baby factories once they are prosperous. Anyway, quality over quantity is important for human development and sustainability. Spiritual growth need occur, though bacterial traits remain as in the von Bezos paradigm. In the book of Genesis, God provided information concerning human origin. Simplistic readings were sufficient in previous generations. Today, however, with the rise of evolutionary biology and other sciences, it is useful to incorporate the book with deeper insight, understand the book. It is fundamentally incorporative of evolution directed by God within an unknown paradigm. Since God is omnipotent, he has greater control of mass and energy than would a future quantum supercomputer able to treat mass and energy as items as malleable as a holographic field created by the quantum supercomputer. Human future development needs to bring the Earth to ecospheric recovery while moderately developing human habitats around the solar system that one day would be able to support total solar system population of 15 billion with just 1 billion enjoying the Earth at any given time. The human business model to exterminate 1 million species. Essay 176. May 6, 2019. A UN study warns that 1 million species are threatened with extinction. That means fishing prospects aren't good in Alaska either. Wrangell, Alaska formerly was the location of the Alaska Pulp Corporation that cut 500 million board feet of trees each year. It was a Japanese-owned corporation that devastated Alaska coastal forest old growth. Though it closed about 25 years ago, tourists are just now replacing the income a little, with 60 cruise ships scheduled to make port calls this year. And a note, that of course was canceled. There were no cruise ships that visited this year because of COVID-19. And the government was, of course, unprepared to provide alternative economic infrastructure activities, and there would have been in a reformed economy. Humans in such vast numbers today, approaching 8 billion, wreak huge impacts on the land and water as well as the atmosphere. The fishing is very bad in Alaska this year, incidentally. It would be possible to have some fishing of quality for sports and subsistence fishermen for some time to come if the commercial catch was reduced to at least equal proportions with the other sectors. And some entire parts of the fisheries of Alaska should be cut off from fishing altogether to allow some large fish to grow and for a healthier ecosystem to exist. And the president's administration recently allowed more oil sale leases on Cook Inlet, which threatens the beluga whale, the Cook Inlet beluga whale. And there aren't a lot of places for them to live otherwise, and it'll be warming up in the future. They need some chance to exist too. There's actually a fourth estate that wants a share of fish, animals. Animals need fish to eat and to help keep the ecosphere alive. It is all cut of one cloth. If just human economic structure virus killing off life instead of multiplying it is going to exist, the biblical admonition to be fruitful and multiply, equally applicable likely to the biosphere as well as just humans, won't be able to go on. Just humans in a godless shag carpet screwball empirical existence is more toward the yippie side of things than the responsible, sober, and accountable. Essay 187, Defeating Malthusian Problems with Determination and Intelligence of the Will of God. Man does not live by bread alone. He needs a healthy ecosphere too, as well as spiritual liberty. Some ecologists have said the carrying capacity of the earth is 2 billion people, yet there is no reason to panic immediately. Save that for later. And I'd like to add this comment that when human reason and human governmental structures become dysfunctional, what usually results is war. War and or plague, mass death is a natural solution to it's an irrational solution that actually becomes rational by entering when rational structures fail. And presently, U.S. leadership, and not just that of the West, of the entire world, economic structures that developed since humans had economy in consuming the environment, they're just failing to recognize and adapt to at all sufficiently to the challenges of the world and overusing it. Human prospects are limited by their lack of good sense, foresight, and engineering rather than necessity. Malthus regarded people as one might regard bacterial growth in a petri dish that exhausts its food supply. Hopefully, people are a little smarter than bacteria and can do better at sustaining their existence and ecosphere medium culture. It would be possible to convert the Earth into an ecosphere park for humanity. Humanity would live mostly off-world in space constructs. Inorganic material could be harvested from other planets and moons for industrial purposes. Projects to build vast new ecospheres in various solar system niches could go ahead. Imagination and determination is all that is lacking. In the meantime, as much of the Earth that can be restored ecospheric health as possible should be attempted, because pragmatic scientists like James Lovelock have said that the Earth may tolerate human economic development in its present form just another century or two before breaking down. From a human life sustainability point of view, it might be good to limit new city development forms that would survive ecospheric breakdown better than steel glass box cities. Humans could build artificial mountain ranges and develop a pollution-free electric transportation infrastructure with clean energy. Wildlife could be tagged and tracked so large animals could return to wander freely. Even so, if global atmospheric and oceanic heating crashes, world agricultural human survival might fare better within temperature-controlled hollow mountain ranges. Agriculture on places like the moon should be productive. In low gravity, one would expect vegetables to grow 1,800% larger than on Earth. In zero gravity, there may be no real size limit to vegetable growth. Maybe potatoes could grow the size of dome football stadiums. Sealed growing micro-ecospheres would recycle and conserve water on Earth and in space. Space products could be grown, dehydrated, and sent to Earth with water mostly remaining at the source. Ecological economic policies will be requisite throughout the solar system in centuries ahead, and sooner, hopefully, the primitive, unsustainable, and wasteful historical ways just won't work on a tight environmental budget. Humanity need apply reason, knowledge, and common sense to solve the world's problems, to its survival. The problems are within us rather than in the stars. Essay 188, The 1% Slop the Pigs Good, 26 April 2019, written before the COVID crisis of 2020. The U.S. economy is as robust as it has ever been within a classical Western economic paradigm. President Trump is good at business, yet it's non-sustainable business ecologically, and public debt is $22 trillion. Now it's about $26 trillion. Paying interest on the debt is quite costly, nearing $1 trillion annually. Most of the national income goes to 1% of the population. They Historically, 95% of the wealth of most nations have gone to 1% of the population or less. The United States is not quite there yet, but it's well on its way after all the tax cuts since 1980. And there is no tax on capital, and there should be, as well as on inheritance and income that is progressive. The share paid to the poorest 50% of the people versus the 1% is comparable to the cost of slaughtering pigs. An interesting point is that China is the world's largest consumer of automobiles. American manufacturers need to sell cars to China in the years ahead, as well as in Latin America and India. Cars are harmful to the world ecosphere in a number of ways, including the roads built for them, asphalt, heat-absorbing parking lots, pollutants, etc. Old-style, non-sustainable economics doesn't care about reducing the human footprint or pursuing ecospheric synergy with human economic activity. With no U.S. global leadership and moving toward low-polluting, non-invasive hypertube mass transit for the majority of substantive human travel, the world will become even more saturated with cars. Fossil fuel burning cars, more forests destroyed, more species made extinct, and ocean temperatures grow warmer while the rich have better air conditioning to disregard it. Neither Obama or Trump, especially Trump, put any effort into or have understanding of ecological economics. What the United States needs is a good employment rate based on new ecological economic sustainability. See Ecological Economics, 2nd edition, Principles and Applications, Herman Daly and Joshua Farley. If one considers the implicit weakness of ecospherically unsustainable economic infrastructure, the human economic structure, virus, then both Presidents Obama and Trump rated F on economic leadership. 189. AOC's Green New Deal was off the mark, not too extreme. No, it's not too extreme. It's just off the mark. As in chess, accuracy matters. When addressing such large issues, efficient engineering design, including social engineering, is a requisite. It's better to let reformed capitalism pay for a transition to ecological economic infrastructure itself through investment morphing than tax dollars. Regulations and incentives are requisite for creating ecological economic infrastructure. The present capitalist creative destruction is an extreme process, firmly established and quite costly to the environment. Resistance is futile, and judo one redirects the opponent's energy rather than directly opposing it, as might a Marxist hoping for an atom smasher economic synthesis of a new, bigger atom smasher economy. The corporate socialist party owns the broadcast media and concentrates wealth for the 1% while degrading the health and viability of the world ecosphere. The corporate media and entertainment businesses have forced moral decay on the USA. Academia is awash, an environmental atheist, without any spiritual sense nor respect for individuals and families. It is an elitist we know better than the Minions cult. In fact, the elites of the East Coast had believed that getting rid of the traditional American family was necessary for ecological reform, but also for corporate reform, because they believe it needs to expand too much. And doing that was a bad idea because it destroyed morality, which again, with homosexual marriage, which reinforced wealth, is all it did, was help concentrate wealth. And getting rid of families is a direct attack on human and civil rights of all people, and it eliminates, to a certain extent, obfuscates family lines and bloodlines, and it made a farce of parenting. In the informal development of a new post-Roberts Court homosexual marriage paradigm, I believe that DNA testing of families and genetic lines will supplant traditional marriage for family as people marriage institutions which have little validity. I think parents will become, including adoptive parents, will be more like guardians, and children will have more human rights. Homosexuals shouldn't have been persecuted. What should have happened was they would have created their own separate new institution establishment to entangle themselves legally to whatever degree they wanted, and left traditional marriage alone. And traditional marriage, heterosexual marriage, should have been reformed anyway, and perhaps capped socially at 3 marriages per lifetime, rather than making it serial polygamy, as one sociologist called it. Even so, ecospheric reform appears necessary for human survival on Earth. The economic infrastructure is old style, unsustainable. It consumes the ecosphere and biosphere, converting it into disposable consumer items and manure. highly entropic systems. Reform is needed, and it would seem far more extreme than AOC's one goal of reducing greenhouse gases plus neo-socialism. It wasn't comprehensive enough. Interesting idea, though. Maybe she will read an environmental economics textbook and try for a better and more comprehensive ecological economic-based policy. About honor, a post from an online course I took. The choice of Maddie in True Grit as an example of honor seemed wrong. She was a likable character and her motives were reasonable. Ned Pepper's killing of her father caused her to want revenge. Revenge can arise from other causes than honorable. Revenge may be caused by hate, rage, grief, a sense of loss, and not from an insult to honor at all. Legal compensation for harm to oneself or one's properties is an ancient practice. Even Tacitus wrote about Germanic legal values. In some primitive societies, where the economy and its tools are basic and common, honor may be in not being possessive about property. If someone admires your knife that is easily made from stone, you might give it to him to prevent jealousy. In an advanced society, private property is required to allow private and differentiated personal interests to occur without disruptive interference. People pointed out making computer chips in clean rooms. They need to be completely private. You can't have homeless people wandering around in design and production facilities for computer chips, for example. Although, homeless people should be better taken care of in the United States anyway. There should be a minimum income of $6,000 a year for all adult Americans in order to prevent people from becoming lost in poverty and currents of poverty and undertows, and to allow people to pursue artistic and enterprising ventures for themselves, becoming quite adept experts in many cases that they couldn't otherwise, needing to just chase after the dollar as younger people. There's a practical and reasonable side to Kant's categorical imperative. HIV was distributed largely by leftists or those without a sense of spirit and preference for materialism. Good character matters. It is regarded as honorable. Honor is not something found simply with dualists or Southern Americans and viewed with disdain by Professor Bloom. It is inherent in not lying, cheating, stealing, corrupting, and such does exist. Wheresoever one might think a profit can be taken. One of the birds that I feed out here occasionally just knocked on the door. They're fairly smart, the blue jays, and if you hear that knocking sound, it's the blue jays. They hear me reading aloud, then they know I'm in here and want some food. Social failure to develop good character among citizens, lack of civic virtue and honor, disrespect for intelligence, patience, long-suffering, sobriety, and so forth, even disrespect for the work of the Lord Jesus Christ engenders social breakdown at a time in history when intelligent leaders of good character and honorable people are requisite to lead society from mass destruction. Nothing was said so far about an honor system, meaning, in this case, honesty policed or enforced by each individual. That is an important value to have. A society without thievery is honorable when it is caused not through fear but from pervasively good character. Eretaic ethics are so basic to a good society that an omission of it from a discussion of honor is laughable. Such a criterion is consistent with the selection of a tavern and hard alcohol users as a context where honor can be said to occur. Fundamentally, being mildly temporarily impaired with alcohol isn't honorable, especially amid strangers. 195. Ecosphere defense and cutting federal debt. President Trump can try to slow growth of federal public debt, and that's about it. It was nearly $21 trillion when he took office. It's past $22 trillion now. This is again before the 2020 ecosphere, or 2020 COVID crisis. Because of supply-side economics carried to a ludicrous extreme, the Congress and politicians aren't very serious about reducing debt. They aren't reformers either. Discontinuing highly entropic economic structures deleterious to ecospheric health would provide macrostructural tax reform policies as well. It could likely reduce the public debt. I have some ideas about the Congress at least starting a committee on finding remedies for human economic virus, that is HES, that is causing the breakdown of the historical health of the ecosphere. There's a Ways and Means Committee and intelligence, etc., yet nothing about the ecospheric problems the evolved form of the human economy is inflicted on the world ecosphere. The new congressional committee should study the problem and find ways to accomplish reform of HES to a sustainable and non-ecospherically fatal form. It would look for anti-HES virus policies that could be legislated. It would be like Congress studying for a cure of cancer, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with single step for you grasshopper information. With the need for wholesale economic policy reform evident and lacking from either policy, the prospects for reform and reduction of the federal deficit are problematic and penultimate to addressing the larger question of human survival on Earth. Global warming is just a symptom, although potentially fatal, of the human economic structural attack on the health of the global ecosphere. It can be corrected, yet a start need be made by Congress to address the entire problem, a piece at a time. Geoengineering isn't a better way to repair economic damage to Earth. Essay 196. It is remarkable how people avoid facing up to the fact that human economic and living, zoning, and operations infrastructure evolved in anti-ecospheric health paradigms, and they are the problem. And the problem can be fixed with just large-scale geoengineering terms that let unsustainable economic practices continue. There was an article in Business Insider, How to Reverse Climate Change, from April 2019 that addressed the issue. The article is a good example of off-the-mark big schemes that ignore the requisite transformation through redesign of human living and economic practices. Change would bother business. Global warming is not the only problem. It is a symptom of the problem. Several fatal ecospheric illnesses are caused by the maladapted human economic structure, HES virus. I suggest that the Congress create a permanent committee that studies and finds the remedies to particular ecosphere problems that are a result of maladaptive HES. Solutions require more than just a single bill or the Environmental Protection Agency to reverse the tide like a King Canute order might do, restoring ecospheric health. Sustainable economics, also known as the discipline of ecological economics, requires changes in hundreds of areas from living to industry and business practices and zoning. The optimal ways to bring about even a few changes within the minimum of economic harm while economic transition is occurring should be a study and actions taken by Congress on a lasting basis. It is not a one-off fix-all bill. Moral nihilism of academic moral norms. 13 April 2019, Essay 199. It seems as if the effort to place mortality within deterministic evolutionary behavior annihilates the human freedom of intentional selection of moral criteria. Humanity has evolved beyond the age of moral innocence of animals, however, and might not well choose to re-enter that state through the sinkhole of evolutionary responsibility. Tit for tat rapport may not work if only one winner is possible, for example, if the loser dies. It also assumes an individual point of view that may not work in mass social behavior. That is the logic structure of a game between individuals that is believed to account for moral content of the mass social Venn diagram of moral behaviors, may not serve or reflect the moral praxis of the social dialectic's interest in formation. A more concrete example might be tit for tat among the rich that leads to concentration of wealth and breakdown of social well-being and moral norms for a majority, the poor yet formerly middle class. Monte Carlo theory, Game's algorithm for genetic communities fulfilling goals of inputting as much mass energy as possible for oneself. Trial and error with error punished by extinction. Abstraction to consider, experimental trial and error without the death penalty. Boolean algebra tables for testing reciprocal altruism. Though it is reciprocal altruism, it is non-discriminatory regarding members, a formalized structure within the theoretical paradigm of a modern Christian support group that helps everyone in the group with their goods or services because everyone would give. It would be useful to quantify the goods and services to make it more serviceable, avoiding bankrupting some and benefiting others too much. There would be a community good and services credit exchange and members could get what they need. It would function as a bank. Withdrawals and contributions would be limited, though the rich could donate credits to the poor. There would be a cap on the maximum and minimum number of credits any individual could possess, though none on the quantity of input from individuals. One would receive credits for giving, though the entire system is based on God's altruism. Corinthians 3:19, quote, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness." Unquote. Conforming oneself to worldliness is counterintuitive to spiritual moral development. Human reason surpasses the blind quantum computer maker paradigm. The concept of human moral universals. Essay 203. Philosophy and psychology differ substantially in form and content. Linguistic or analytic philosophy is concerned with word meanings, relationships, and so forth. Contemporary philosophers, in my opinion, tend toward nominalism instead of realism for word meanings. Words fall within linguistic ontology. Many of those can't have their meanings accurately translated into another ontology. Universals in particular, terms familiar in logic, especially in regard to Platonism, are ideas that persist in social memory and in a realm of form to Platonists. Yet for philosophers like Saul Kripke, words go so far as Neoplatonism, perhaps with rigid designators, retaining permanent meaning for quite a while. The realm of forms likely may not be regarded with too much belief. If there is theoretically perfect behavior for human beings, morality and truth in himself, Jesus Christ was the only one to ever have it. Everyone else fell short of that, being temporal beings with innate drives based on consuming energy for growth. That behavior sometimes creates conflict. That is probably what original sin is. In nature, animals eat one another for growth. Humans are supposed to have had a great awakening in the Garden of Evil and learned to differentiate good from evil. They became self-conscious and thought to put on clothes. They learned to lie and dissimulate with language deceits. At some point, they began to think it was wrong to eat other humans, although God needed to provide rules about eating animals raw. One day, self-aware computers may reach that Garden of Eden moment themselves and be able to discern good from evil and be able to learn to lie and dissimulate. Humans grew and adapted behaviors and social interactive practices in differing environments and social challenges. Human morality are recurrent social behavior practices that are acceptable and workable for the given social group, adapted to the empirical challenges they experienced. Neither would all human social groups progress at the same rate. In some respects, moral norms differed as much as the pace of technological growth. The idea that Professor Bloom has that people are innately good seems a product of a privileged social class and society. Although good and evil have a subjective quality, one might want to regard some concepts such as murder as universals. A grandson of Nelson Rockefeller was visiting New Guinea about 1960 and reported an incident, if I recall correctly, where he was talking with two natives that wanted to sell him something. One clubbed the other to death in order to have an exclusive sales opportunity. Rockefeller later disappeared there, and his body was never found. He may have been one of the last Westerners to fall victim to cannibalism. The practice of eating the dead persisted there until a few decades ago. It was a ritualized religious practice believed to help the spirits of the dead. Most of humanity has had a very violent past until fairly recently, in hundreds of years. Although some rely on religious devotions to guide them toward peaceful lives, the majority don't, and neither do all religions guide toward peaceful lives. Fear of swift reprisals by formal law enforcement has driven humanity into sweet public behavior, although now some rioters are trying to eliminate formal law enforcement organizations. I think it is a great social fallacy to believe that groups that were compelled to peacefulness because of proximal threats of harm would not evolve their own tendencies toward violence if liberated and free to enact domination. Sin means to miss the mark. If all humanity acted according to the Spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ, the world wouldn't have the exploitation and disequalitarianism it does. They don't, obviously. Society sins farther in some areas than others, and at a different pace. Elite college moralists tend toward supporting license for anything that isn't violent. Medicine can fix it if harm follows. Evolution is treated as if it contradicted the truth of God. Eating the dead would be okay for the elites if they regarded humanity as tasty. Dressing that up in philosophical robes won't help. Evolution may devolve human moral norms in some social environments. The notion that evolution implies inevitable moral progress hasn't validity. It may be an incorrect synthetic a priori judgment. Fantasy. Moral behavior patterns evolve to fit the times and circumstance. Wisdom does not. That last doesn't sound too good, does it? Democrats lack loyalty, purity, and respect. Essay 207. I am learning about some of the fundamental differences between Republicans and Democrats, aka conservatives and liberals, in a free online course from Yale University named Moralities of Everyday Life. There are 5 fundamental elements of morality that are mentioned in the course. Those are 1, harm care, 2, fairness, reciprocity, 3, in-group loyalty, 4, authority, respect, 5, purity, sanctity. Liberals are said to value the first 2 elements and downgrade the latter 3. while conservatives are fair and balanced and regard all five equally. I should point out that the Course has a moderately leftist center of balance. An unstated assumption is that God isn't active or existent. Science is godless, and thus its investigations need to start from the point of view of godless objectivity. Unfortunately, that may be wrong with those blinders on. There was a portrayal of Immanuel Kant as the prime representative of deontological morality as opposed to moral relativism or consequentialism that is an offspring of act-based utilitarianism. Kant's essential value to philosophers was an epistemology more so than morality. In the Bible, wicked is the term used for what we call evil. Natural disasters are called evil. Another nit to pick is the use of the word sin. To sin means to miss the mark of, as in archery. Sin means people are going off course, wrong, and perhaps finally so, destined to miss eternal life with God and heaven. It is not a simple list of bad or permissible acts. Kant, of course, felt he could infer moral systems from epistemological considerations, inaccurately, I guess. What was remarkable about Kant was his delineation of perception, reasoning, and knowledge into three categories regarding what is known or can be known, epistemology. The Course is a good Yale professor of psychology inquiring into the nature of what morality is. Some in the field would like to find a scientific basis of morality. Even inquiring into innate moral laws reminds me of Marcus Tullius Cicero's treatise on natural law. Nothing new in that. It is quite possible to make erroneous judgments regarding observation of experimental results concerning causality and the criterion of occurrence. Anyway, to make short work of this note and to the point, liberals, aka Democrats, are against authority and establishment, haven't loyalty to the United States, want existential change because they regard themselves as impure. Dirtycrats were thus pro-homo marriage. They usurped a rational heterosexual role and put on that dress for themselves in an effort to remove the stains of impurity. Democrats were for the malfeasant Obamacare because of concern about harm to the down dogs. The rash Obamacare missed the mark of creating a free national health care walk-in system for the poor, and those middle-class untouchables denied insurance coverage because of pre-existing conditions. Down dogs for Democrats are those who are not straight white males and Republican, excluding the poor, of course, who are unmentionable to Democrats. All that needed to be done was to expand the VA hospital system and link it with poor people's clinics around the nation and screen prospective patients through a workers' comp kind of interview. Democrats are against border security, job security, and pragmatic national democracy because it isn't socialist enough, and they're disloyal and hate the insider group that is already there. Democrats prefer the revolt to put the down dogs on the top through radical change, so it is easy to understand Democrats. That party and the Republicans lack education sufficient to bring about ecological economic reform, and in effect, both parties support the Wall Street milieu of the rich getting richer because the elites of both parties are members of it. I've enjoyed the course. The content seems to lack philosophical depth and understanding ontology, see W.V. Quine, and epistemology. Another common error is to fail historical knowledge concerning civilization and its changes. Yet another is the lack of solid theological education such that they comprehend the facts about Christianity meaningfully. It is much deeper than they view it ordinarily. I would guess that at some point moral considerations should include mention of the role of mass agents of socialization in foisting new moral balances upon the people of the United States that are rich on the broadcast media and train the public to accept the moral norms they program them with. How Christians Do Not Sin, Essay 221. I have wondered if people might not misunderstand John. When saved, one gets credit through the Lord as if one had never sinned. Sanctification may make the temporal life a work in progress. One could compare temporal life to RAM space in a computer where the imperfect condemned humanity lives. Jesus converts imperfect character code of those with faith to perfection before allowing them into the eternal SSD. A program may be perfectly written as it were suitable for a Garden of Eden. Characters created in the program may be given free will and operating instructions. They disobey, and the program is given a correction to contain the free will. Virus runs amok. The free will of virus may have good and bad characteristics. Because it emulates some of the creative, inventive spirit of God. Bad because it breaks the parameters of its own existence as if a dog off a leash in a home near a freeway runs into 8 lanes of high-speed traffic. Interestingly, sin of the unsaved and those with badly understood theology use global economics to move the world to an ecospheric brink. Before the program code of the characters is allowed into the eternal SSD of heaven, the code must be corrected. God is perfect, and imperfect code just won't work in heaven. Jesus, through his atoning sacrifice, enters good code for each individual character subroutine who is saved, so they can exist eternally with God through the Lord. Or maybe Jesus' own subroutine is given to people to run for them, and they are given credit for using it. God sees the perfect programming, or perfect code of the Lord, although the Lord's beyond coding and programming, is part of in the Trinity and God. Over time, the code of each character is transformed, likened to that of the Lord, who is perfect and fully God. The saved do not want to sin, though as imperfect beings with corrupted code, they probably do. They still have bodies that are reason enough for condemnation through original sin and existing in thermodynamics with all the problems that consuming that follow. Some have associated the liberal viewpoint of freedom to sin, since Jesus is screening them from the penalty of sin viewpoint with the Gnostic heresy. If one cannot be credited with sin after being saved, then the reasoning went, why not use that as a license to sin? That viewpoint misunderstood the entire criterion of salvation. Romans 6:1, quote, "What shall we say? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? To God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein?" Quote, unquote. 2 Corinthians 4:7, quote, "But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Always bearing about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our body. For we which live are always delivered unto death for Jesus' sake, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our mortal flesh. 12, so then death worketh in us, but life in you. 13, we have the same spirit of faith, according as it is written, I believed, and therefore have I spoken. We also believe, and therefore speak, knowing that he which raised up the Lord Jesus shall raise up us also by Jesus, and shall present us with you. For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might, through the thanksgiving of many, redound to the glory of God. 16, for which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed every day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a more exceeding and eternal weight in glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. 222 on the topic of choosing your own determinism. My thoughts on the topic of choosing your own determinism outside yet not exclusive of a Christian criterion are: a theory of determinism may be constructed with several criteria from which to choose for whatever purpose is apropos for the goal in making the selection. The point might be illuminated with the analogy of a quantum field of all possible world lines where, with an intelligent particle wave, e.g. a sentient monad or one-dimensional point, could choose its own waveform collapse location in the universe with quantum decoherence, ossifying it down into being and becoming a solid state amongst others. I guess another paradigm would be that of a philosopher getting off of a boat in Le Havre, France, who has a choice before debarking, a priori, of what and where he chooses to go. His will is predetermined, perhaps to walk to the library and see the books that self-educated man might have gone over to choose what to read first and last. The philosopher might wonder about the determinism of the universe, or universes, with metaphysical speculative thought. He might inquire with mind dialectics and induction, levering synthetic progress with a posteriori cosmological data about his own phenomenal incarnation as being in the universe, if he could have free will or even sentience, if the entire universe is physically predetermined. He might wonder if he could not have sentience as a 20th order branch location of a large tree of life, perhaps as a sentient leaf growing contemplatively old. 229, Ecotopia and City Planet Planning. We have made a study of ancient Earth and the history of its population dispersion that brought humans from the old world, the eastern hemisphere, to the new world, the west. We found that though the Westerners were fully modern humans biologically, that because of their separate development remote from the parent population of the East, they lost the multicultural tool and technological development of the East that synergistically cross-fertilized other ancient civilizations with technology and a reinforcing process that accelerated technological tool invention and the dispersion of knowledge. Initially, humans migrated west as early as 30,000 BC, yet most came much later, beginning about 15,000 BC. That was before the invention of human metallurgy in the East, and so the migrants went west without knowledge of metal making, and they entirely lacked a cultural situation that would soon produce metals. Pre-Columbian Americans never developed metal smelting technology. They were thus limited to stone building without the elaborate carved columns, such as decorated Corinthian columns with crenellated flutings. Because building great stone cities required a critical mass of population for workers, construction of the great pre-Columbian American cities of the Aztec, Inca, Maya, and so forth occurred much later than the rise of civilizations in the Eastern Hemisphere. Even so, with the metal technology of the East, woodworking, and the appearance of Christianity, most of Europe never experienced the construction of great stone cities, and those that did, such as Athens, Etruria, Rome, Knossos, and so forth, were of a phase that was passed and not duplicated in the wooden cities to the north. The Westerners were biologically modern humans, and their intelligence continued to evolve, or rather their brains had, at the same pace as their peers in the East, yet they did so without the inheritance of Eastern culture and developed stonework without metal tools. They developed sandals without a swoosh. That skill continued right until the arrival of Columbus. Technologically, the Americans were more than 7,000 years behind in technological development. It is easy to extrapolate from the maximum pre-Columbian population of about 20 million Americans that it is likely that less than 500,000 Easterners ever made the far journey west over the 30,000 years before Columbus. If they had, their population should have been quite a bit larger by at least an order of magnitude. The law of accumulation works in demographics and economic growth. We have learned from that on Calvin Luther Caesar. That Calvin Luther Caesar is a reference to a science fiction novel I wrote named Pieces of Eight. Overpopulation, growth rates, etc. Essay 230. Every generation has a 1% annual rate of economic or population growth. At the end of 30 years has about a 33% per generation increase. The law of accumulation is ignored by the ignorant. Over a century, the increase is thousands, and that law of accumulation applies to demographics as well. Thousands of times of increase on Earth-like planets without a capacity to provide even a fraction of the natural resources. When we will build a new world of Earth-size home someday, we may begin with a construction population of 10 billion and soon thereafter reduce population for the new planet through measured one birth per family for a few generations, the normal carrying capacity for an Earth world of 2 billion. Some of the entire population may relocate to construct another world. It is normal that each new world has an optimal ratio of humans per surface area for production and a healthy ecosphere simultaneously. Populations cannot achieve zero population growth, static stability, then experience a flood of immigrants to replace them without causing more damage to social infrastructure and the ecosphere. With a calm drawdown of population growth, while technology and education of the masses increases, world ecospheres could be directed to recover and new opportunities for building off-world ecospheres explored. It is important to begin building terrarium ecospheres with as much wildlife from Earth-like worlds as possible to improve the art, that is, planet-sized terrariums. Innovative ideas for moons and planets can bring new ways of letting life flourish, including new human populations intelligently designed to be in appropriate numbers for the new ecospheres. Adroit political management, rather than coercion, need be the political method for stabilizing human populations as it bides its time before increasing again in new ecospheric regions it learns to build. Those ecospheres should be as robust and teeming with life as that God gave unto mankind, rather than depleted of it. There is a time to grow a population and a time to hold fast or even decrease. Sometimes, fortunately, rarely for politicians, conservative sober rectitude is the requisite for species survival. Essay 254, Matter, Energy, and Original Sin. And I'd like to add a comment because I read this book, Mass, that fundamentally describes mass as a secondary quality of energy. The Higgs field slows particles in two-dimensional particles traveling about at the speed of light. It slows them down so they develop a third dimension, opposed to their line of travel. And so with the existence of three-dimensional particles, the universe can exist, in effect. Yet the underlying basis for that three-dimensional mass of the universe, planets and such, galaxies, is two-dimensional, or even one-dimensional, because one wonders where one-dimensional points arise from. There must be a pre-existing field, and because virtual particles are simply fluctuations of a field, but there shouldn't be any field. And why should the field have dimensions without existing dimensions already, and why only a few? There are a lot of interesting questions, and it makes original sin a rather phenomenal thing in a way too, more so with matter and energy here. November 5th, 2018. I was reading Louis Berkhof's Systematic Theology recently and viewed a chapter titled Man in the State of Sin. Berkhof goes over the historical opinions of select theologians in regard to the origin of sin in the world. Berkhof's work is quite interesting, leads indirectly lends support to some very modern ideas, or leads to. The background for the theological controversy regarding original sin is quite interesting and largely beyond the scope of this blog. Note that I am making it primarily for my own later use. Of course, prior to the historical life of Jesus, there were several religious and philosophical ideas about the nature of evil and matter. Not all of those ideas made their way to ancient Israel or Athens to such an extent that they would become popular or well known in the 1st and 2nd centuries after the crucifixion, when the disciples had passed on and Scripture was being conserved, and canonized theologians also began to address various points of doctrine that would actually require centuries to develop. One such point was that of original sin. Was the fault in matter and somewhat predestined, or did Adam simply make a voluntary choice to sin, and thereby, and Eve, of course, and condemn every human ever after to bear the guilt of original sin? The different points of view comprise something of dialectic of opposites. Supporter of the fault is in matter and energy eventually became associated with Gnosticism and Pelagianism, while the Adam is entirely to blame school became associated with St. Augustine. There was a kind of in-between school that was known as semi-Pelagian. I'm interested in the point not only because of its historical and theological interest for myself. I have given some thought to the issue myself while considering modern creation theory in regard to the biblical Genesis creation narrative. Adam seems to make his choice to sin before he is in the normal world with its thermodynamic and evolutionary processes that are the rule rather than the exception. That seemed very plain. Berkhof seemed to believe that Karl Barth felt the Adamic temptation and fall happened in suprahistory, or what I believe is a greater metaphysical situation that God created that transcended the material universe or even preceded it, although like folded space-time dimensions and membranes with shortcuts through them, the idea of linear time progression of all things cannot necessarily be informative of before and after concerning space-time of suprahistory. I also thought that the garden scene of Adam and Eve occurred in a superhistorical context, and that as punishment for sin, Adam and Eve were downloaded into a thermodynamic ecosystem universe suitable for sin as normal in matter, with thermodynamics. Therefore, once Adam and Eve had sinned, all of humanity thereafter, their hearts, their heirs, and whomever else was created to populate the fallen world they were cast into outside the garden, it was thereafter inaccessible and guarded by 4 cherubim, perhaps each assigned a space-time dimension to defend, time being 4th dimension, would be born into a thermodynamic universe where original sin of eating, sexting, and dying are so inescapable. An interesting point in Genesis is that the antediluvian descendants of Adam and Eve do not have an instant normal mortal lifespan. There seems to be a gradual relativistic slowing merger into the normal Earth space-time. My opinion then is somewhat more semi-Pelagian than purely Augustinian or Pelagian. I agree with Augustine that human nature is totally depraved because it coheres within the temporal universe selected for its thermodynamic characteristics. In that fallen universe, the only way God might even notice people as anything besides being of the corrupted universe, the context, is if they have ate the body and blood of Christ spiritually, so that God sees Christ rather than sin in them. I hesitate to use the term semi-Pelagian, though for its historical definition that cannot provide the facts about the relationship between original sin and the space-time mass energy of the evolving material in the Higgs field that itself is probably embedded in some sort of a metafield. And Jesus Christ is eternal God, and so eating of the spiritual body and blood of Christ brings eternal life to oneself. And it also weans humans off actually eating. There was still cannibalism existing in the world in the year zero. I believe the fact is that interpreting the Bible and accurately understanding scriptural-based theology may take more thousands of years to get a solid start upon, because people just aren't that bright or necessarily informed by God about all things that they might be curious about upon their own schedule. Augustine was right about many things theologically and quite an inspiration for believers. With a Calvinistic notion about predestination, it is quite reasonable to accept Augustine's idea that mankind is totally depraved because Adam chose to disobey the will of God, and that he used his own free will to make the choice and was therefore entirely to blame. Augustinian liberty with a Calvinist state of predestination, where the bulk of the predestination is just God's prescience of what someone will choose, is a reasonable precursor for the corrective action of God to thrust Adam and Eve into a fallen material world. We're evolving creatures and put energy existentially to exist and grow and have a kind of cellular division to generate more like themselves sexually. Those creatures have original sin in the nature of the matter wherein they cohere, yet until they advance to a certain state of self-aware cognizance, they also have primeval innocence in their ignorance of the differences between good and evil, animal versus man, and the conscientiousness of a sentient being. The actual mechanics and timeline of God's interaction with and interpolation and extraction of Adam and Eve from superhistory to history aren't presently known in concrete terms. That is an example of why I think it may require a few thousand years to accurately comprehend God, willing. Another clarification about salvation, the way for salvation, a quote from John 3:14 and on, from what Jesus said. Quote, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not in him, he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For every one that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God."